They thought they'd crushed me, a small-town strategist who dared challenge their game, but they didn't know I was ready to ignite a blaze that would reduce their lies to ashes. My name is Ethan Brooks, a strategist at Pinnacle Retail, a chain that brings life to every main street from Ohio to Oregon. For 5 years, I poured my soul into this company. I started in the back, stacking boxes in a dusty stockroom, the kind where the fluorescent lights hum and the air smells of cardboard. I worked late, skipped dinners, and built a cost-saving plan that cut waste and saved the company $3,200,000 last year alone. It wasn't flashy, but it worked. Numbers don't lie, or so I thought. Victor Langston, our biggest shareholder, had a different story. He stood at the head of the boardroom table last month, his tailored suit gleaming under the Chicago skyline. His voice was cold, sharp enough to cut glass. Ethan's plan is bleeding us dry. Profits are tanking because of him. I sat there, stunned, watching the board members shift in their seats, avoiding my eyes. Ellen Whitaker, the chair, cleared her throat but said nothing. I'd trusted her to have my back. I was wrong. The next morning, a termination notice landed in my inbox. Fired. No discussion, no warning. Just a cold email at 7:42 a.m., telling me to clear my desk by noon. I felt the floor drop out. 5 years of late nights, of proving myself, gone in a single click. My tiny apartment, with its brick wall view, felt like a trap. I usually unwind with sports podcasts, but that day, I only saw Langston's lies. I paced the worn carpet, my coffee going cold on the counter. Langston's words didn't add up. Profits weren't down. They were up 12% last quarter, and my plan was the engine behind it. So why was he coming for me? Why now? I opened my laptop, scrolling through old emails looking for answers. That's when I found it. A file buried deep in a shared drive, mislabeled as Q3 projections. It wasn't projections. It was a trade log, Langston's trade log, dates, numbers, accounts, millions of dollars in Pinnacle stock, sold off in quiet batches to offshore accounts. He'd been inflating our numbers, pumping up the stock price, then dumping it for profit. Insider trading, plain and simple. The kind of thing that could send a man like him to a federal cell. My hands shook as I read it. This wasn't just about me. Langston was using me as a scapegoat to cover his tracks. He'd built his fortune on lies, and I was the one paying the price. I could have called the cops right then, but Langston wasn't some corner store crook. He had lawyers on speed dial, a penthouse in Gold Coast, and half the board eating out of his hand. Going straight to the SEC would be like walking into a lion's den with a paper shield. I needed a smarter play, something that would hit him where it hurt. I grabbed my phone and called Rachel Quinn, a journalist I'd met at a conference last year. She had a reputation for tearing down corporate giants with nothing but a pen and a deadline. "Ethan, this better be worth my coffee," she said when she picked up, her voice sharp but curious. I leaned into the phone, my voice low. "Rachel, I've got proof Victor Langston's been rigging Pinnacle's stock. Insider trading, millions of dollars, all documented. You in?" There was a pause, the kind that makes your stomach twist. Then she laughed, a low, determined sound. "You're saying you've got Langston's dirty secrets? Hell yeah, I'm in. Let's nail this guy tomorrow. Bring it all." We met at a diner off Michigan Avenue, the kind with checkered floors and waitresses who call you hon. Rain streaked the windows as we slid into a booth, the smell of coffee and bacon hanging in the air. I handed Rachel a USB drive with the trade log. She plugged it into her laptop, her eyes scanning the numbers. "This is airtight," she said, her voice low but intense. "He's been dumping stock while faking Pinnacle's growth. The SEC will eat him alive." I nodded, my jaw tight. "He's using me as a scapegoat. Said my cost-saving plan tanked profits. It's a lie, and he knows it." Rachel leaned forward, her eyes sharp. Then we make sure everyone else knows it too. But we need to be precise. One misstep, and his lawyers will bury us both. We spent hours in that booth, mapping out a plan. A straight leak to the SEC wouldn't work. Langston's influence could delay or bury their investigation. We needed to go public, fast and loud. Rachel proposed a media blitz, timed to hit during Pinnacle's shareholder meeting in 3 days. "We get this to the Wall Street Journal," she said, tapping her laptop. "They break the story mid-meeting. Langston won't see it coming." I liked the sound of that, but doubt gnawed at me. "What if they don't believe us?" I asked. Rachel smirked. "They'll believe this file, and I know an editor who owes me a favor." The next 2 nights were a blur. I barely slept. My apartment a mess of takeout boxes and scribbled notes. Rachel and I cross-checked every detail in the trade log, linking transactions to Langston's shell companies. Each one was a piece of the puzzle, proving he'd been siphoning millions while pinning the blame on me. My phone buzzed constantly with Rachel's updates. "Editors on board. Drafts ready. We're set for Friday, 9 a.m. My heart raced every time I thought about it. This wasn't just about saving my job. It was about exposing a man who thought he was untouchable. Thursday night, I sat alone, staring at the USB drive. I'd copied the file to a secure cloud, just in case Langston's goons came looking. My apartment felt like a fortress under siege, every creak making me jump. I thought about my dad again, his voice steady in my memory. "Fight smart. Ethan." I was fighting, but the stakes were higher than I'd ever imagined. If this backfired, I'd lose everything. My career, my savings, maybe even my freedom. But if it worked, Langston's empire would crumble. I opened my laptop one last time, checking the encrypted email Rachel had sent. The article was ready, locked and loaded. All we needed was the perfect moment. Friday morning, 8:50 a.m. I stood outside Pinnacle's downtown office, the glass tower gleaming in the Chicago sun. My suit felt tight, my pulse hammering in my ears. The shareholder meeting was about to start. Langston would be inside, smirking, ready to seal my fate. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. 5 minutes. Stay ready." I slipped the phone into my pocket, my hand brushing the folder of printed evidence I'd brought as backup. Langston thought he'd won. He didn't know the storm was about to break. My heart pounded like a drum as I stood outside Pinnacle's glass tower, the Chicago skyline cutting sharp lines against the morning sun. It was Friday, 8:50 a.m., and the shareholder meeting was about to start. Victor Langston was inside, probably sipping his overpriced coffee, ready to hammer the final nail in my coffin. He thought he'd outplayed me, pinning his dirty stock deals on my cost-saving plan. But I had a surprise for him. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Rachel Quinn's text glowed on the screen. "It's go time! Article drops in 5. I tightened my grip on the folder of evidence, the weight of it steadying my nerves. This was it, the moment everything changed. I slipped into the building, past security who barely glanced at my old badge. The elevator ride to the 32nd floor felt endless, each ding a countdown to war. My suit, the one I'd worn to every board meeting, felt like armor now. I stepped into the hallway, the murmur of the meeting leaking through the glass doors. Langston's voice carried, smooth and confident, as he spun his lies about strategic missteps and necessary changes. My name was on his lips, twisted into a weapon. I clenched my jaw. He wasn't getting away with this. At 9:02 a.m., it happened. A ripple ran through the room. Phones lit up, one by one, like fireflies in the dark. Laptops pinged. A shareholder gasped, her eyes glued to her screen. The Wall Street Journal had just published Rachel's article, "Pinnacle Shareholder Caught in Multi-Million-Dollar Fraud." The headline alone was a gut punch. It exposed Langston's scheme. Brutal details. $5,300,000 in offshore accounts, stock prices rigged to line his pockets, all while he pointed the finger at me. Notifications multiplied. Langston's voice faltered mid-sentence. He fumbled his notes, his face draining of color. I pushed through the doors, uninvited. My folder raised like a flag. Every eye turned to me. The air was thick, electric. "Victor," I said, my voice calm but sharp enough to cut through the silence. "You forgot to check your tracks." I slid the folder across the polished table, pages fanning out, printouts of his trade log, emails, bank transfers, ironclad proof of his crimes. Ellen Whitaker, the board chair, snatched the documents, her hands trembling as she read. "These are illegal trades," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Shareholders leaned forward, their murmurs growing louder. Langston stood, his chair scraping back. "This is a setup," he shouted, his polished facade cracking. "You're desperate. Brooks, you're finished." I didn't flinch. "Desperate? No. Victor, I'm prepared." I turned to the room, meeting their eyes. "This man's been stealing from you, from Pinnacle, from every store clerk and truck driver who keeps his company running. He blamed me to cover his tracks. These documents don't lie." I pointed to the folder, my voice steady but burning. A gray-haired woman in a blazer stood up, furious. A man in a suit muttered, "He's done." Another slammed his laptop shut. "Is this true, Ellen? Did you know?" Ellen shook her head, her face pale. "We didn't, but we'll find out." The room erupted, voices overlapping, phones buzzing with follow-up alerts. Langston's buddies on the board thought they could save him. They were wrong. They tried to calm the chaos, but it was too late. The truth was out, and it was louder than their excuses. Langston lunged for the folder, but a security guard stepped in, his hand raised. "Sit down, Mr. Langston," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. I caught a glimpse of Langston's eyes, wild with panic, his empire crumbling in real time. Shareholders were already pulling up the article on their tablets, whispering about SEC investigations and lawsuits. I stood there, my pulse still racing, but a strange calm settled over me. I'd done it. I'd turned the tables. But the fight wasn't over yet. Langston's fall was just the beginning. The boardroom was a storm of voices, papers scattered across the table like debris after a wreck. Victor Langston stood frozen, his face a mask of fury and fear, as shareholders fired questions at him. The Wall Street Journal article had ripped his world apart, and my folder of evidence, trade logs, emails, bank transfers, was the final blow. I stood at the edge of the chaos, my pulse still racing from crashing the meeting. I'd exposed him, but the air felt heavy, like the fight wasn't over. Ellen Whitaker, the board chair, banged her gavel, her voice sharp. "Order! We need order!" The room quieted, but every eye was on Langston, waiting for him to break. Ellen turned to him, her face hard. "Victor, these documents are damning. Explain yourself." He opened his mouth, but his usual smooth talk faltered. "This is a fabrication," he stammered, pointing at me. "Brooks is trying to save his own skin." A shareholder, the gray-haired woman from earlier, shot up. "Save his skin? You're the one with $5,300,000 in offshore accounts." The room erupted again, and I caught a flicker of desperation in Langston's eyes. He was sinking, and he knew it. I stayed silent, letting the evidence speak. My dad's words echoed in my head. "Fight smart, Ethan." I'd fought, and the truth was winning. By 10:15 a.m., the board called an emergency vote. Shareholders, furious at Langston's betrayal, didn't hesitate. The motion to remove him from the board passed in minutes, unanimous except for his two loyalists, who sat stone-faced. Langston tried to protest, his voice rising. "You can't do this. I built this company." Ellen cut him off, her tone ice cold. "You built a lie. Security. Escort Mr. Langston out." Two guards stepped forward, their faces blank. Langston grabbed his briefcase, his hands shaking, and stormed out, the glass doors slamming behind him. The room felt lighter, like a storm cloud had passed. But I wasn't celebrating yet. The SEC moved fast. Rachel texted me mid-meeting, "Investigators want the files. They're coming for him." Langston's offshore accounts were frozen by noon. His stock sales halted. News outlets piled on, with CNN and Bloomberg running follow-ups on the scandal. Pinnacle's stock took a hit, dropping 8% by midday, but analysts credited my cost-saving plan as the company's lifeline. Without it, the damage would have been worse. I sat in a quiet corner of the office, watching the news scroll on my phone. Langston's name, once a symbol of power, was now a headline for fraud. I'd taken him down, but I was still the guy who'd been fired. I wondered if the board would even care. Ellen found me an hour later, her heels clicking on the marble floor. "Ethan, we owe you," she said, her voice heavy. "I should have listened. Let's fix this." I braced myself, expecting a lecture about crashing the meeting. Instead, she sat across from me, her eyes steady. "You took a hell of a risk, but you saved this company." I blinked, caught off guard. "I just did what was right," I said. She nodded, a faint smile breaking through. "That's why we want you back, not just as a strategist, but as a key advisor. You've got a mind for this. Ethan, we need it." I leaned back, the weight of the past week lifting slightly. They weren't just offering my job back. They were handing me a seat at the table. I returned to Pinnacle the next morning. My old badge reactivated, but the office felt different. Colleagues who'd avoided my eyes now nodded as I passed. A store manager from Ohio, a guy named Tom who'd worked the floor for 20 years, pulled me aside. "Heard what you did," he said, his voice gruff. "You stuck it to that suit. Good for you." I smiled, but it wasn't just about Langston. It was about every employee who'd been screwed over by his greed. My cost-saving plan, the one he'd trashed, was now being rolled out across all 200 stores. By the end of the quarter, it was projected to save another $2,800,000. The board was listening to me now, and I wasn't wasting the chance. Langston's fall kept making waves. The SEC dug deeper, uncovering more accounts tied to his scheme. His name was poison, his charity galas canceled, his penthouse listed for sale. I read about it over coffee in my apartment, the same one that felt like a prison a week ago. The Chicago skyline sparkled outside, a reminder of how far I'd come, but something bigger was stirring. Employees started speaking up, sharing stories of corner cutting and shady deals Langston had buried. A cashier from a Milwaukee store emailed me, saying my stand gave her the courage to report a manager skimming hours. A driver in Texas called out fake delivery fees. My fight wasn't just mine anymore. It sent a signal. Corporate America listened. Greed's days were numbered. A week after Victor Langston's empire began to crumble, I walked into Pinnacle's boardroom, not as a disgraced strategist, but as a man with a new title. The board had voted me in as a full member, a seat earned through the fire of exposing Langston's fraud. The Chicago skyline gleamed through the windows, a quiet reminder of the city that had shaped me. I was 32, a kid from a small Ohio town who'd once stacked shelves in a Pinnacle stockroom. Now, I was helping steer a company worth billions. My first move wasn't about profit margins or stock prices. It was about making things right. I stood at the head of the table, facing the board. Ellen Whitaker nodded for me to start. "We've got a chance to rebuild trust," I said, my voice steady but firm. "Not just with shareholders, but with every employee who clocks in every day. Langston's greed hurt them most. We need transparency, audits that actually mean something, and protections for anyone who speaks up." The room was quiet, but I saw heads nod, even from the old guard who'd backed Langston. They knew the company couldn't survive another scandal. My plan was simple but bold. An ethics overhaul, starting with open books and a whistleblower program that didn't just exist on paper. By the end of the meeting, they greenlit it. I walked out feeling lighter, like I'd finally honored the kid who'd started in that dusty stockroom. Langston's world kept unraveling. The SEC's investigation tightened like a noose. By month's end, they seized $12,700,000. His accounts were locked. His Gold Coast penthouse hit the market, its price slashed to cover legal fees. News outlets ran his story into the ground, his name a synonym for corporate greed. I'd catch glimpses of it on my phone, scrolling through headlines over coffee in my apartment. Once, he'd been untouchable, his face on magazine covers, his name on charity plaques. Now, he was a cautionary tale, a man who'd bet against accountability and lost everything. But this wasn't just about Langston's fall. Something bigger was happening. My stand had lit a spark at Pinnacle. Employees who'd stayed silent for years started speaking out. A cashier in Milwaukee sent me an email, her words raw and honest. "I reported my manager for skimming hours," she wrote. "Your fight showed me I could." A driver in Texas exposed a scheme inflating delivery costs, saving the company thousands. Store clerks in Iowa and Oregon called out shady practices, from fudged inventory to unsafe working conditions. Each story hit my inbox like a wave, building into a movement. They called it the Pinnacle Pact, a quiet pledge among workers to hold the company to a higher standard. I hadn't planned it, but I'd started it. I leaned into my new role, pushing for changes that went beyond Pinnacle's walls. At a board meeting in July, I proposed a national campaign, partnering with other retailers to share our ethics framework. "This isn't just about us," I told the board, my voice carrying the weight of every employee's story. "It's about showing every company that integrity isn't optional. It's the foundation." They listened, and by August, we had commitments from 3 major chains to adopt similar reforms. I gave them a voice. "If you've been silenced, speak up. Your story matters." One evening, I sat in my apartment, the same cramped place that had felt like a cage during my fight with Langston. The Chicago skyline glowed outside, its light steady and warm. I thought about my dad, his voice still clear in my mind. "Fight smart, Ethan, and don't stop." I'd fought, and I wasn't stopping. But the real victory wasn't my new office or my title. It was the emails, the stories, the voices that had been silenced for too long, and that was just the beginning. Thank you for diving into this thrilling revenge stories Reddit Radio TDS tale of how fired by a major shareholder. I exposed him at the shareholder meeting, thinking they could bury me, only for me to unleash a shareholder meeting takedown with revenge. This is a fictional work created for entertainment. Any resemblance to real people, places, or events is purely coincidental. If you love gripping tales of corporate shareholder revenge, boardroom drama, and public expose shareholder, follow me on X for more electrifying Reddit revenge stories. I'm Ethan Brooks, a storyteller showing truth triumphs over lies. Share your revenge story in the comments or on X with Pinnacle Pact under Chicago skyline.